This lesson is all about I. No, not me, the imaginary number I. That's right, there are imaginary numbers, and they can appear for real on your SAT. We'll begin this lesson with an important rule about square roots. You can't take the square root of a negative number, but what happens if you do take the square root of a negative number? Well, then you get an imaginary number, and that brings us to I. I is the square root of -1. It's not a real number, it's imaginary, but you still need to know how to work with it. For starters, you can add it to another I. When you're adding i's, just treat them as you would a real number. I plus I is 2i. 3i plus 4i equals 7i. What if you add I to a real number, like I plus 3? Well, then you have a complex number, which we would typically express as 3 plus I. A complex number is a number that can be expressed in the form a plus bi, where a and b are real numbers and I is the square root of -1. And now back to our question. What is I plus 3? We learned that I plus 3 is the complex number 3 plus I. In complex numbers, the real number, 3 in this case, gets listed first. There's nothing else to do. 3 plus I is as simple as that complex number gets. Some more examples of complex numbers include 3 plus 2i, 8 minus I, 7 plus 3i, and 134 minus 32i. On the SAT, you'll need to know how to add complex numbers. The first rule for the addition of complex numbers is pretty easy. Each complex number is made up of a real number and an imaginary number. Like in this example, 3 plus 2i plus 4 plus 7i. The first complex number here contains a real number, 3, and an imaginary number, 2i. Similarly, the second complex number contains a real number, 4, and an imaginary number, 7i. To add two complex numbers, add the two real numbers together, that's 3 and 4, which equals 7. Then add the two imaginary numbers together, 2i and 7i, which gives us 9i. That gives us 7 plus 9i. Now let's take a look at a practice question similar to what you might find on the SAT. For I equals the square root of -1, what is the sum of 8 plus 10i plus -2 minus 3i? And here are our answer choices. Let's start by underlining the facts, circling the keywords, and labeling the answer choices. The first fact we underlined, I equals the square root of -1, is there to remind us that I is an imaginary number. The SAT is friendly in this way. If they give you a question with an imaginary number in it, they tend to want to make sure that you know it's an imaginary number. So this question has us working with numbers that contain i's. Good thing we just learned some important rules. And yes, there are negative numbers in our complex numbers, but that's okay. We're still adding the two complex numbers together, so we'll follow the rules that we just covered. We have two complex numbers, 8 plus 10i and -2 minus 3i, and we're being asked to add them together. So we're going to add the real numbers, 8 and -2 together, which gives us 6. Then we're going to add the imaginary numbers, 10i and -3i together, which gives us 7i. So we have 6 plus 7i as our answer. Looking at our options, that's answer choice A. Okay, so adding i's and adding complex numbers isn't really so complex. Let's move on to subtraction. Spoiler alert, it's pretty much the same thing, but with subtraction. When you're subtracting i's, just treat them as you would real numbers. I minus I is 0. 2i minus I is 1i. And 7i minus 3i equals 4i. Now let's look at complex numbers. As you've probably guessed, subtracting complex numbers is basically the same thing as adding complex numbers, but with a minus sign instead of a plus. Let's look at an example. 12 plus 10i minus 4 plus 6i. We can break this down to 12 minus 4 plus 10i minus 6i, which gives us 8 plus 4i. So we've talked about adding and subtracting I as well as complex numbers. So now it's time for a pause and solve. I'll give you space so you can work the problem out on your own, then we'll reconvene and go through it together. Grab some paper and a pencil, and when I say pause, you'll pause this video and solve the problem. When you're done, unpause the video so we can make sure you know how to solve the problem. Here's the question. For I equal to the square root of -1, what is 8 plus 10i minus -2 plus 3i? And here are our answer choices. All right, ready, set, pause. And we're back. How did you feel doing that on your own? If you weren't uber confident, don't worry. That just comes with practice. Let's work through this problem together and see if we get the same answer. We'll quickly underline the facts, circle the key words, and label the answer choices. This question tells us that I equals the square root of -1 to remind us that this is a complex numbers question. And sure enough, we have two complex numbers. We're being asked to subtract, so we'll use the complex number subtraction formula we talked about. Real number minus real number, and then imaginary number minus imaginary number. So we have 8 minus -2 and 10i minus 3i. The double negative turns into a positive, so we have 8 plus 2 and 10i minus 3i, which gives us 10 plus 7i, or answer choice D. We learned that I is the square root of -1, and we learned that adding and subtracting complex numbers isn't as complex as you might have thought. But do you know what will make it even easier? Doing at least a few practice problems. So go check out some of the hundreds of practice questions.